they're buying $300 million airplanes. And some of these $150, $300 million private planes, by the way, after they buy them, they're spending another maybe $100, $200 million to outfit them with saunas and hot tubs on the planes, and then they're done up like a palace. These folks are buying 40,000-foot houses in multiple locations around the world. They're buying 400-foot boats. I mean, the guys who produce these yachts, they have production orders for the next 10 years. I mean, they can't even fill all the orders that they have. There was a piece in the Times, I keep talking about this because it's so unbelievable. These four bankers went out to lunch, spent $62,000 for lunch. I mean, what is it that you buy for lunch that costs $62,000? Four guys. And the answer is they have 4 bottles of wine for $15,000 a bottle. But the whole system is just so dishonest and takes advantage of ordinary people in such a terrible way. Why do people stand for this? Why are you standing for this? I mean, if you belong to a labor union, at least you have somebody you can go to. You can go to your shop steward. And it used to be labor was very hot on this issue, especially at the time that the labor movement got started in the United States. And they were on this issue for the whole 19th century. In this century, somehow labor has given up the ghost, and there's a whole story to that. Well, all of this money that the banks create out of nothing, why do people accept it? I mean, why don't they? I mean, typically when you trade for something, you're trading work for work, value for value. I mean, the evidence that there's no work involved in creating the money is how much more work does it take to create a $100 bill as compared to a $1 bill. I mean, all they got to do is add zeros. I mean, there's no more work. So all of this business, when people trade their work and their work product for money, they're not getting work for work. They're getting something which, in effect, that somebody creates out of nothing. They're getting nothing for something. And when someone gets nothing for something, someone's getting nothing. When someone gets nothing for something, someone is getting something for nothing. And the peeps who are getting the something are the financial guys. They're doing no useful work. All they're doing is moving paper around, and they get these enormous profits. Well, the reason people get to accept the irredeemable paper tickets or electronic money is that it's all legal tender. This is something I spoke about last week. But what I want to talk about now, just for a moment, I just want to show you a quotation that came from Salmon Chase. Salmon Chase was the Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court after the Civil War, and he was the one who got to adjudicate the legal tender cases. And here he wrote in one of his cases, he said, the legal tender quality of money is only valuable for the purpose of dishonesty. Of dishonesty. This is a chief sitting justice of the United States Supreme Court telling you if your money is legal tender, there's something dishonest. Come back to me, please. So this whole system, right from the get-go, everything about it is dishonest. It is not in conformity with the Constitution, which means it's not lawful. Now, I want to focus now for the rest of the program, and this is really what I've been talking about for the last couple of weeks, has to do with the testimony that the head of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve gives to the House Banking Committee and the Senate Banking Committee twice a year. And what I want to talk about is, what should these people be asking the head of the Federal Reserve? I mean, typically, if you watch these sessions on CNN, they are so inane, so ridiculous. The only guy in the Senate and the House who has anything really intelligent to say to any of these people, in my opinion, is Ron Paul, our hero in the Congress, and by the way, a member of Fame's Board of Advisors. And he is on to the monetary issue. But even at a time when the dollar has lost tremendous value, where you see major companies, a major company where with a clean balance sheet, $85 a share book on Friday afternoon, on Monday morning, it's smoke. Ron Paul is the only one who asks substantive questions. So now I want to talk about another question, or a couple of questions that should be asked. And I want to focus first on bank issues. Let's go to the next slide, please. So today, this is really a key issue that should be focused on. Today, bank balance sheets are in effect guaranteed by the public. Bank assets are protected systemically by the so-called lender of last resort bailout facility at the Federal Reserve, and bank liabilities are protected at the micro level by so-called federal deposit insurance. Come back to me, please. Now, the spin on this notion of the federal deposit insurance is that it's there to protect depositors. That is just spin, folks. They hardly have any money in that insurance pool to protect depositors. The reason federal deposit insurance came, it came in 1935 after the banks had all failed, is that people were not putting their money back into the banks. And so in order to induce people to put money into the banks, they passed this federal deposit insurance thing. So in effect, the government, which in effect means you, guarantee bank liabilities. So if the bank goes under, the government, through the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, will make all the depositors good. But again, if we had an honest monetary system, you wouldn't have to do this. Also, this notion of the bank assets being protected systemically by the lender of last resort, that's what we see now. And now it's not just the banks. So after the Bear Stearns Company had to be taken over by J.P. Morgan, and again, the reason there was that Bear Stearns, in my opinion, had 13, and this is a fact, but my opinion as to why it was taken over, had $13 trillion worth of derivative bets on its balance sheet. And so they couldn't let Bear Stearns go bankrupt because the counterparties for that $13 trillion were other banks, which could have led, in fact, to a rolling bunch of defaults. The whole financial system all over the world could have collapsed. So we have these various guarantees for the banks. We guarantee their assets systemically, and we guarantee their liabilities. No other industry group in America or around the world has these kinds of guarantees. And so a question that I think that ought to be asked, let's go to the next slide, please, is are these guarantees in conformity with free market principles? And the next slide, please. And what authorization is there in our Constitution for these guarantees? Come back to me, please. Well, the notion of the free market, is that people take their own losses. They don't get, if you lose your job or if your company goes bust, you don't get to go to the government and say, well, replenish my balance sheet. Why should the banks get their balance sheets replenished? And if you go through our Constitution, there is no authorization in the Constitution to bail out particular sectors of the economy. And in effect, these guarantees, they are subsidies, and I'll have more to say about that in a moment. But one of the guys who was onto this, and he did open his mouth about it, although he only did it once, was Alan Greenspan. And the question that ought to come up, and I want to talk about Greenspan in a moment, the question that ought to come up is, do these guarantees induce banks to leverage their balance sheets more than they otherwise would if these guarantees were not present, as has been suggested again by Federal Reserve Chairman Greenspan? Now come back to me, please. In 1997, Alan Greenspan, while he was the chairman of the Board of Governors, made a very remarkable speech in Belgium where he addressed these issues. In fact, he also raised the issues of collapse and a whole bunch of other stuff. His speech was not covered on this side of the ocean. It was remarkable that he even talked about any of this, and I wrote a little book about it. It's called What Does Mr. Greenspan Really Think? This book is a free download off the FAME website, the fame.org website, or if you don't want to bother printing it out, it's just $12 and change from Amazon or Barnes & Noble. And here's what Mr. Greenspan had to say about this. Go to the next slide, please. This is directly from Mr. Greenspan's talk that day. He said, increased availability of a central bank credit facility, this is the guarantee, where they guarantee the assets of the banks, even if not drawn upon, can induce increased credit extension by banks and increased activity by their customers, since creditors of banks are more willing to finance banks' activities with such a government backstop available. Now come back to me, please. So really what he's saying is that providing these guarantees to the banks, they can make more bets than they would otherwise make. Or to put it in the parlance that we see today, they could issue more subprime mortgages than they would otherwise issue. Why? Because they know in the end that if something really goes bad, that the taxpayers are going to bail them out.